Welcome back to the ones who turn their scars into scripture, the forgotten into fuel, the abandoned into architects of something untouchable. Welcome to those who documented every dismissal, cataloged every insult, studied every betrayal like a detective building an airtight case. They watched your world collapse, didn't they? They had their phones ready, witnesses assembled, commentary prepared. They celebrated when your career imploded, when your partner left, when you couldn't make ends meet, when dinner was crackers and hope for 14 days straight because pride was all you had left to spend. They celebrated when you broke down, when you reached out, when you asked for mercy that arrived in the form of silence. They believed they were documenting your demise. They had no idea they were recording the birth of something that would live in their nightmares, something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about human capacity, something that would follow them through every achievement they pretend to enjoy. Because here's what escaped their attention while they were building monuments to your misery. You weren't just existing in that void, in that abandonment, in that poverty, in that psychological desert. You were conducting research. You were building files. You were recording every act of treachery like a prosecutor gathering evidence. Every manufactured concern like exhibits in a trial. Every abandoned commitment like chapters in a dissertation on human weakness. Your lowest point wasn't your burial site, it was your research facility. And you became the case study that demolished every theory about human limitation and proved that people can be shattered completely and return sharper, colder, more calculated, more lethal than anyone anticipated. They assumed rock bottom was your address. They couldn't comprehend. Rock bottom was your boot camp, your university, your initiation into a dimension of awareness most humans never encounter because they've never been required to reconstruct themselves from complete erasure. Let's examine what actually transpired in that facility, shall we? While they slept without consequence, you were conscious at 3 a.m, eyes wide, thoughts accelerating, planning, designing, strategizing. While they performed their curated happiness, you were embracing quietness, mastering the art of solitude, realizing that being alone becomes power when you're constructing kingdoms inside your consciousness. While they chased validation from audiences, you found validation in your reflection, in the version of yourself that kept breathing even when breathing felt like an act of defiance against logic itself. You absorb lessons in that space that universities don't teach, money can't purchase, bloodlines can't transfer. You absorb that desperation creates focus, that betrayal exposes truth, that isolation manufactures clarity, that suffering is the most ruthless educator if you possess the courage to remain present for every brutal lecture. They celebrated because they assumed you required them, required their endorsement, their inclusion, their sympathy masquerading as friendship. They assumed observing your pain would justify their own mediocrity, their own fear, their own rejection of risk or ambition or conviction. But with every celebration, every whispered conversation, every time they distributed your story like entertainment at a wake, they were actually serving your evolution. They were revealing their authentic selves. They were dropping their disguises without conscious awareness. They were providing you with the ability to see through flesh into intention, demonstrating that most people sabotage your success because your achievement forces them to confront their stagnation. Your ascent makes their paralysis unbearable. Your metamorphosis reveals their justifications as fiction. You develop the ability to see past surfaces, interpret subtext, sense the intentions behind gestures, identify the venom in compliments. Now, let's discuss the instrument you were forging because that's the actual narrative. Every restless night was a chapter in the instruction manual. Every breakdown was ink in the design. Every moment of helplessness was testing and refinement. You weren't simply enduring agony. You were converting it, transforming it, changing it from something heavy into something so precise it could slice through deception, through exploitation, through counterfeit affection, through empty guarantees. You constructed an instrument from your perception, from your capacity to recognize patterns invisible to others, to sense changes in atmosphere others dismiss, to anticipate consequences others can't conceive. You constructed an instrument from your quietness, because quietness isn't fragility when it's intentional, when it's strategic, when it's the breath before devastation. You constructed an instrument from your recollection, recording every individual who smiled in proximity and destroyed from behind, everyone who vanished when crisis arrived, everyone who applauded your collapses and resented your attempts. And here's the element they still can't process. Even now, as they observe your elevation, even now as they witness the harvest from your facility years, the instrument you constructed isn't vengeance. It's not cruelty. It's not resentment dressed in achievement. No, the instrument is you, the transformed edition, the enhanced version, the one who doesn't respond to their manipulation anymore, doesn't require their approval anymore, doesn't react when they attempt the same strategies that previously succeeded. The instrument is your emotional sophistication, your pattern detection, your ability to disappear without justification, your capacity to build in silence while they communicate in circles. The instrument is your detachment from their perspectives, your resistance to their criticism, your liberation from their demands. They assumed they were observing your destruction. They were actually observing you becoming impenetrable, untouchable, unbreakable. They were observing you becoming the entity they could never control again. Let me describe what's occurring in their reality right now. In their private moments, when darkness arrives and they're isolated with their conscience, they're contemplating you. They're questioning how you accomplished it, how you escaped from that abyss they were convinced would be your permanent residence. They're examining your existence, searching for evidence, for weaknesses, for indicators that you're performing, that you're not genuinely whole, that the damage remains, just concealed more effectively. But what they discover disturbs them. They discover someone who doesn't broadcast for attention, someone who doesn't justify themselves anymore, someone who operates with a different species of certainty, not aggressive or arrogant, but silent and absolute. The species of certainty that doesn't require convincing anyone of anything. They observe someone who's constructed something authentic while they were occupied constructing illusions. They observe someone who's genuinely content while they're still performing contentment for spectators who aren't invested. The truly perverse aspect is some of them want to communicate now. Some of them want to reconnect, to express regret, to pretend they supported you always, to revise reality like they didn't celebrate, didn't ridicule, didn't abandon you when you were suffocating. But you understand what's magnificent about the facility years, about that period spent in isolation, constructing your instrument. You acquired discrimination. You acquired the understanding that not everyone merits access to the evolved you. That certain connections need to remain severed. That resolution is a present you provide yourself, not something you anticipate receiving from individuals who never invested. You acquired that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that you can release the fury without unlocking the entrance. That tranquility isn't about permitting everyone return, but about being selective with who approaches the empire you constructed from devastation. Now we access the phase they dreaded would materialize, the phase where you're not simply surviving, but commanding, not simply recovered, but unreachable, not simply healed, but evolved into something they lack vocabulary to describe. You move differently now, not pompous, but certain, not aggressive, but undeniable. Spaces transform when you occupy them. Discussions pause precisely long enough for everyone to register. Something has shifted, something fundamental, something cellular. You don't attempt to impress anymore because you've surpassed the requirement for external approval. You don't attempt to conform because you've understood conforming with mediocrity is its own imprisonment. You don't attempt to be comprehended by individuals who've never experienced your journey, who've never constructed your foundation, who've never transformed suffering into strength the method you have. You simply exist. And your existence is evidence that rock bottom is negotiable as a final location. Let's discuss what you absorbed in that facility that they'll never comprehend. You absorbed that success constructed on suffering possesses a different gravity than success delivered to you. You absorbed that confidence earned through torment is immovable, while confidence granted by advantage disintegrates under stress. You absorbed that the connections forged in crisis endure longer than the ones formed in ease. You absorb that individuals reveal who they authentically are when you possess nothing to provide them, and that intelligence is invaluable because it assists you constructing your circle correctly the subsequent time. You absorbed that your value isn't determined by your finances, your relationship configuration, your professional designation, or anyone's assessment of you. You absorbed that you can surrender everything material and still possess everything essential, provided you don't surrender yourself, provided you maintain that essence of who you are, protected and untouchable. Here's what makes you dangerous now. What makes you the subject they discuss when you're absent? You're not motivated by what most individuals pursue anymore. You're not impressed by superficial achievement, by manufactured luxury, by inherited confidence, by theatrical wealth. You've seen behind the production. You understand what's authentic and what's performance. You understand the distinction between actual power and the imitation of power, between genuine contentment and the simulation of contentment for platforms. You can't be manipulated with status displays because you've possessed nothing and survived. You can't be controlled with fear of deprivation because you've lost everything and rebuilt. You can't be intimidated by individuals who've never been examined because you've endured examinations that would have annihilated them. You're operating on a different frequency now, a frequency most individuals will never access because they've never been forced to. The facility years taught you something else they'll never absorb because they've never required to. You absorbed that every individual who celebrated your struggle was actually documenting their own character, providing testimony of who they authentically are when someone is vulnerable. You absorbed that every individual who disappeared during your darkness was actually serving your future, removing themselves from your trajectory, demonstrating they were never intended for your next chapter. You absorbed that every individual who attacked you when you were defenseless was actually strengthening your determination, adding fuel to your fire, giving you names to remember when you construct your empire. You don't require revenge because their absence from your success is revenge sufficient. You don't require to prove anything because your existence is proof. You don't require to explain your journey because the results communicate louder than words ever could. Now let's address the psychological transformation that occurred in that facility, the mental evolution that makes you untouchable. Now you stopped believing that people's assessments of you were more accurate than your own evaluation of yourself. You stopped assigning weight to the criticisms of individuals who've never accomplished what you're attempting, who've never risked what you've risked, who've never rebuilt what you've rebuilt. You stopped pursuing approval from a system that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. You stopped apologizing for wanting more, for being intense, for maintaining standards, for refusing to compromise, for departing from situations that diminish you. You stopped reducing yourself to make others comfortable. Stopped suppressing your presence so others don't feel inadequate. Stopped performing small so others don't feel threatened. You claimed your complete presence, your complete power, your complete potential. And that's what terrifies them. The instrument you constructed in that facility isn't manufactured from anger or bitterness. It's manufactured from clarity and boundaries and standards and self-respect. It's manufactured from the knowledge that you can survive anything, that you're stronger than any circumstance, that you're more resilient than any obstacle. It's manufactured from the understanding that individuals are temporary, but your relationship with yourself is permanent. So that's the relationship you invest in. That's the relationship you protect. That's the relationship you prioritize above all others. It's manufactured from the wisdom that arrives from observing yourself rise from ashes repeatedly, from witnessing yourself solve problems that appeared unsolvable, from experiencing your own transformation from victim to victor, from shattered to unbreakable, from lost to found by your own hand. Here's what they observe when they examine you now. What makes them uncomfortable? What makes them avoid your gaze? What makes them anxious in your presence? They observe someone who doesn't require anything from them. They observe someone who's content without their approval, successful without their assistance, complete without their validation. They observe someone who's moved forward completely, who doesn't contemplate them anymore, who doesn't wonder what they're doing, who doesn't care if they're observing. They observe someone who's constructed a life so fulfilling that their absence isn't even noticed. Their perspectives aren't even considered. Their criticism isn't even relevant. And that complete indifference to their existence is more devastating than any revenge you could have orchestrated. Because what's worse than being despised is being forgotten, being irrelevant, being nothing more than a footnote in someone's transformation narrative. The facility was never intended to be comfortable. It was intended to be transformative. And transformation, by definition, means you don't emerge the same. You don't emerge softer or kinder or more forgiving. You emerge sharper, clearer, more discerning, more selective, more protective of your peace. You emerge knowing exactly what you will and won't tolerate, exactly who deserves access and who doesn't, exactly where to invest your energy and where to withdraw it. You emerge with boundaries that are fortresses, not fences, with standards that are non-negotiable, not flexible, with a vision that's crystal clear, not clouded by other people's limitations. You emerge as someone who's been to hell and learned the architecture, studied the patterns, mapped the exits, and decided never to return, regardless of who's calling you back down there. Now let's discuss the moment they recognize their mistake, the moment the celebration died in their throats, the moment they understood that ridiculing your struggle was the worst decision they could have made. It was the moment you stopped responding to them, stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending your choices, stopped caring about their narratives. It was the moment you disappeared from their awareness, not because you were hiding, but because you were building, creating, evolving in spaces they couldn't access, on levels they couldn't reach, with individuals they couldn't compete with. It was the moment they refreshed your page and witnessed evidence of a life they didn't recognize, success they couldn't explain, contentment they couldn't diminish, peace they couldn't disturb. It was the moment they recognized you weren't the same person they celebrated against. You were someone completely different, someone they no longer knew, someone they could no longer predict or control or manipulate. The instrument you constructed in your facility has one specific function, one purpose that makes it more effective than any revenge strategy, any public exposure, any revealed truth. It makes you immune to their games, their tactics, their manipulations, immune to their manufactured apologies, their convenient amnesia, their attempts to rewrite history. Immune to their criticisms, their projections, their attempts to make you feel guilty for moving forward. Immune to their presence, their absence, their perspectives, their existence. You've become the entity they can't touch, can't reach, can't affect. You've constructed an internal fortress so powerful that their words bounce off, their energy slides away. Their attempts to reconnect are met with polite indifference or complete silence. You're not reactive anymore because you've processed everything in that facility. You've already worked through every possible scenario, every potential manipulation, every likely approach they might take.